Hey guys, Dodge Landisman here. Figured I'd fill you in on some primary news that fell through the cracks. You could look at a million different YouTube sources for the massive developments of the presidential primary campaign, and I will certainly be out in New Hampshire, as well as Iowa and South Carolina and other states as it comes closer to Super Tuesday to do some on-the-scene live reporting. But before I get there, let's talk about some big news that you might have missed. We have the first ever candidate to drop out of the 2024 presidential race, and that is Miami Mayor Francis Suarez. Suarez announced to decent fanfare. He came off as young, attractive, capable, and dynamic. And clearly, what Suarez was trying to lead with was his vigor, his youth, that compared to Donald Trump and Joe Biden, the guy was clearly in shape and he was ready to lead.
I have always been a runner.
Thursday, in a literal ad about running, Miami's GOP Mayor Francis Suarez said he's running for the White House.
My dad taught me that you get to choose your battles, and I am choosing the biggest one of my life. I'm going to run for president. I'm going to run for your children and mine.
And Suarez has an interesting record as Miami mayor. Suarez was the son of a well-noted Miami politician, came from a lot of money, and ran for mayor of Miami as sort of a moderate. He was actually oppositional to both Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. So he gets into office in Miami, and the following year, he hates DeSantis so much, there's this personal animus towards them, where Suarez actually endorses DeSantis' opponent, Democrat Andrew Gillum, so you can see where his allegiances lie. He endorsed Gillum, and Suarez wanted to become, interestingly enough, the crypto mayor. He put a big crypto transaction center in the middle of Miami and wanted to be the early figurehead to establish a home and establish a place for cryptocurrency, thereby getting him all the support of anybody who's interested in technology, which is certainly a very, very decent base. So Suarez feels like he has a shot. Mayor of a big city. He also chose not to endorse Donald Trump when he ran in 2016, but begrudgingly endorsed him in 2020, interestingly enough. So as he looked at his future presidential prospects, he felt like he had to fall in line. And therefore, he sacrificed some of his integrity, which is why, unlike Kristi, who's doing decent, he doesn't seem to be getting any traction. So Suarez announced his campaign about 2.5 months ago to decent fanfare. The first task was to try to get on the debate stage. In order to do that, you need to poll at least 1%, not a very high threshold, and get 40,000 individual donors. Many candidates used a lot of tricks to get these donors. For example, Doug Burgum, who is the North Dakota governor who did get on the debate stage, was issuing $20 gas cards. So you could donate $1 to Doug Burgum, and then the campaign would send you $20 back in gas cards. Suarez tried to do something similar. He would send a t-shirt if you donated $1, but he did not get the $40,000 donors needed to get on the debate stage. Another big foible on Suarez's part was he didn't know the answer to a key question. In an interview with Hugh Hewitt, a conservative, well-known radio talk show host, he asked him about the situation with the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs is this persecuted Muslim group in China, so persecuted that there are even these forced slave-like labor camps that the government of China is forcing these Muslim Uyghurs to live in, simply because of their religion. So Hugh Hewitt asks Suarez about the Uyghur situation. Suarez says, what's a Uyghur?
Will you be talking about the Uyghurs in your campaign?
The what?
The Uyghurs.
What's a Uyghur?
Okay, we'll come back to that. You won't be. You got to get smart on that.
It's reminiscent of the time when Gary Johnson, running as a third-party candidate in 2016, was asked about the Syria situation with Aleppo, and he said, what is Aleppo? He had no idea. So not knowing a topic that is prevalent in the news, even though I'm sure many people watching would not know what the Uyghurs are, and I was kind of late to the curve to figuring out what the Uyghurs are as well, but guess what? I'm not running for president. So his campaign was quickly killed. He made the wise decision to drop out, and expect in these next 2 weeks for a myriad of other candidates to throw in the towel. Suarez was hoping that he would be the great moderate hope, that he was forward-thinking in crypto and could get a niche. Remember, Ron DeSantis in his Twitter Spaces announcement was very heavy on governmental support for cryptocurrency and felt like that was an emerging voting bloc of young GOP primary voters. So Suarez tried to lead with that. He tried to lead with his attractiveness. He'd certainly be the most attractive candidate in the field, maybe Nikki Haley giving him a run for his money, but that's about it. So he felt like with this image, with this dynamism, but Suarez just came off, I think, as simply too slick. Yeah, you want an attractive candidate and someone who's pleasant to look at, but you don't want somebody too attractive. It's kind of the Gavin Newsom thing, where the guy is just too handsome, where it kind of makes you jealous or it makes the guy unrelatable. So you want an attractive candidate, but think more like Beto O'Rourke or something, but not somebody who's smolderingly attractive. And I would say that with female candidates or with male candidates, it would be the same thing. And speaking of sexiness in the presidential race, the last little bit to fill you in on is that Kristi Noem, who probably would fill that void with Suarez, the North Dakota governor, the South Dakota governor, met with Trump, and it is likely that he will probably settle with her as his vice presidential candidate. Now, he'll certainly meet with other people, but the fact that Noem was the first person he decided to meet with, essentially for a different issue, but you all really know what the internal dynamics are, it is very likely, I would even say 40% chance that Noem is the vice presidential nominee of Donald Trump. That's, of course, if Donald Trump wins the primary, but I think it's pretty likely that he will. So, in memoriam, rest in peace, the Francis Suarez campaign. The first candidate to drop out lasted only 2.5 months, and expect Will Hurd, former Congressman Will Hurd out of West Texas, to drop out next. Will Hurd is also a moderate, but is very proudly moderate. One of the reasons Suarez lost traction is, again, he didn't want to criticize Trump as forcefully as he should have. And the reason that Kristi now is in third place in New Hampshire and is slowly creeping up the polls is because he's the only one that has guts to criticize Trump and go after the rather cultish Trump fan base. So that approach obviously is working. But Suarez is trying to have his cake and eat it too, and essentially avoid any serious questions about Trump, therefore not creating an independent viewpoint and ideology towards him. So voters wouldn't think there's anything original to support him over. So we'll keep updating you about the presidential race, especially the issues that fall through the crack that you might not see the mainstream media covering. Not because it's so important it needs covering, but because this race is interesting. And even the small guys will tell you a lot about the direction of the GOP and the direction of this race. Finally, what I will say is Kristi seemed to corner the market of the anti-Trump people. Suarez is trying to do both. Will Hurd has been more aggressively anti-Trump, even wrote a whole book saying that GOP was too racist, too anti-LGBT, and simply too intolerant, and has thrown lobs at Trump. Asa Hutchinson, though, made the debate, unlike Francis Suarez, and he's been very anti-Trump and has been consistently anti-Trump. He doesn't have that same charisma and that same fighting spirit that Chris Christie has, but Suarez must be feeling pretty bad if the unremarkable, pretty old, pretty vanilla Asa Hutchinson got a lot more individual support than Suarez did. So that concludes the Suarez campaign. Expect Will Hurd to come next. And I think in honor of this, we'll do a video. I have to do some research about this. Hope you enjoyed the 1948 race as well as the 1964 one. And I think for the next video, in honor of Francis Suarez, we'll be looking at the shortest-lived presidential campaign to history. So I know a lot about presidential primaries, so I think it's between 5 candidates off the top of my head. Most likely the shortest-lived campaign was former Vice President Dan Quayle when he announced his campaign in 1999, and then 3 weeks later decided to drop out in anticipation of the 2000 primary election. So I think we're going to settle on Quayle. It might be Alban Barkley, who was the Vice President of Truman, wanting to run in 1952, and campaigns everywhere and ran a pretty consistent campaign. But then the press kept saying, because the guy was in his 70s, that Alban Barkley was simply too old. And then Truman agreed with the press, and decided not to support Barkley. So I'll be looking at the candidates, and we'll upload a nice, juicy video in honor of Suarez as to who was the shortest-lived presidential candidate in history. So keep watching for more primary coverage. Thank you, guys.